Hello there, and welcome to a podcast segment that we like to call Ludic Lives. Now, Ludic Lives is a sub-podcast of our overall podcast, Ludic Lounge. Thank you for rating, subscribing on Apple, Spotify, or any other of the podcatchers of your choice. What Ludic Lives intends to be is just a free-form interview of people that we find interesting. Now, this isn't necessarily to say that they're going to be movie stars or famous athletes. These are just regular people who we find interesting. People who have a story to tell. Their story. In this life, a lot of times, we forget to stop, and we forget to listen, we forget to ask those around us, and especially people close to us, about their story, their narrative, how they see themselves, and the world, and how they see themselves in the world. So thank you for taking the time to listen, thank you for rating, thank you for subscribing, and we hope you enjoy. Hello and welcome, my loyal listeners, to another edition of Ludic Lives. I'm your host of Ludic Lives, Antonicus Maximus, but Anthony to my friends. And speaking of friends, I have one of my great friends on Ludic Lives today. Bryan, goes it, man?
Pretty good. Currently in Texas, and things are pretty solid. I can't complain. Yeah.
Is it true what they say, everything is bigger in Texas?
Kind of.
Nice.
Yeah, at least, yeah, generally. I actually found a tarantula on the side of my wall the other day.
Jesus!
The side of my house. Yeah, I was like, oh, someone's missing their pet. Let's go on Next Door, like the Next Door app. And let's put out the APB, the Bolo. Someone lost a tarantula. They're going to be missing him. No, they're native. They're native to Texas.
I've always said Texas is the Australia of America, obviously.
Yeah, it's like the America of America. It's like, yeah.
Oh, Jesus. The America of America, played and hosted by the band America, obviously.
Yes.
And speaking of all things American, actually, I have no transition from there. But what I will say is at Ludic Lives, if you listen to our first one, I interviewed John, loyal listeners. It was a great conversation. And the whole purpose of this sub-podcast is I want to have a conversation, ask some questions of people who I find extremely interesting and think that you'll find interesting too. So as we go on, Bryan, as I mentioned before in our little pre-show meeting, if you don't feel comfortable answering a question, that's cool. No big deal. I'm not here to put a gun to your head. Or am I? Thank you for the little sympathy laughter you gave me. I know that was quite a pathetic joke. But anyway, transitioning to our first question. But you know what? I'm going to do it this way, Bryan. Before I jump into the questions, a little brief intro of Bryan and I's relationship. So my wife is married to me, obviously, who is best friends with Bryan's wife. And so due to that, when they were dating, I got super close with Bryan. And we just had a connection. We hit it off. And he's just an interesting dude who loves a lot of the same shit I love. And, as natural buds do, we just grew, man. Bryan, am I missing anything? Did I leave out anything there?
You were a high-level personnel at my wedding, actually. You were, I think it's the officiator? Is that the title? I forget all these.
As some people like to call me, Father Anthony. Yes, I actually, in their official, unofficial wedding that they did, I actually, through my tears and through my emotions, my just banter, if you will, the day of, I was fortunate enough to officiate their wedding, even though it wasn't technically because they got married beforehand, but it was a beautiful ceremony. I officiated it. I am not anywhere related to any priesthood and or religion, so don't think Father Anthony, and start sending me your confessionals, please.
But I mean, it is only mid-2020. I mean, why not? Why not get something going? But
right? Fuck it. It's not like it can go any worse. Jesus, I said it. Oh God.
Dun dun dun.
Damn it.
Dun dun dun. But yeah, and generally it's. I mean, not to kiss your ass too much, but you are a fun dude to be around, and not a lot of people can transition from the Macho Man to Mass Effect, and then like World War II all in the same night and in the same beer. So
I was just saying,
not a lot
in
of
the
people can do
same breath too. At times, I felt like I just like was a fucking rambling wreck.
that.
There was a few beers and or other alcoholic beverages in.
Yes, indeed,
God.
indeed. But yeah, I don't want to delay too much. I am ready whenever you are.
Excellent. So the first question of the day for you, Bryan, is what is it that you feel comfortable sharing about yourself with the listeners listening at home, in their car, etc.?
I guess it's a little boring, but I'll try to do it in kind of a chronological highlight. These are not in order of merit. This is just chronological. I was born and raised in Florida, Southwest Florida, the swampy portion of it, and near the Everglades. I went to a pretty amazing high school. I joined the Army shortly after high school for a myriad of reasons. We can go deeper into that if we feel like it. But I was a medic in the Army for about 5 years. I deployed to Iraq for the year of 2005 and 2007. And around 2007, I had trouble swallowing, as weird as that sounds. I had difficulty getting food down. And long story short, I got a biopsy done in Kuwait, and I had stomach cancer. So super random. I was like 22 at point in time.
Shit.
Yeah, it was really wild. Again, we can go deeper into that later. But after that, I got treated for cancer at a Walter Reed Army Medical Center. I kind of moved back to Florida after that. I was a little bit in a tailspin, but I just decided like, hey, if the man's going to pay for it, I'll go to college. And I did that. And I got a degree in political science, which not super lucrative right now, but I can really whip ass on Jeopardy. But I didn't accrue any debt from that, and the man paid for it. So thank you, taxpayers. I appreciate it. Then after college, I don't know. It was very strange for me, but somehow my gypsy lifestyle just led me to California, where I met my wife and Anthony, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, I am not Bryan's wife. Just letting you know.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I must have slurred those words. I am definitely sipping a Bud Light as we speak. So
yeah, I just cracked open a cold one myself because nothing's better than sharing a cold one while your friend interrogates your life, obviously.
Yeah, I couldn't look at your face and not drink a beer. I don't know what that says exactly. I don't know if that's a compliment. I don't know if that's a compliment or like I'm just like I can't contain the party once I look. But
when I look at you, Anthony, I see an alcoholic.
Very influential alcoholic.
Absolutely. I'm a bad influence, Bryan, but a great bartender.
Indeed, indeed.
Well, you mentioned one of the things, obviously you mentioned your service. And one of the things I wanted to ask you, I have some other military friends, veterans, etc. And one of the things that I, always tend to do is like, hey, thanks for serving. And the first thing they tell me is like, don't say that, man. It's not cool. So I wanted to ask you, Bryan, do you just hate it when people are like, Bryan, thank you so much for your service, and like pat you on the back, pat you on the head, etc.?
Kind of. It's a mega complex kind of thing. We could almost do a full episode on that generally.
Ooh, don't tempt me.
But let me try to organize my thoughts. So like most people and at least this is the Army speaking. Most of my experiences with the Army. They don't think they don't consider themselves to be heroes. It's just kind of you have a job, you execute, and you're there for the person next to you. And sometimes when people are like, thank you for your service, there's like a bit of undertone of like, you should be more heroic after the Army too. Like, what? No, what? I don't know. But no, it's appreciated, but it's hard to say because part of it, that is when I was young, that is part of the reason I joined up was I'm trying to not sound vain, but I guess the glory or the prestige, it's a little bit wrapped up in that, the respect and in medias res of the Army, like when I was in the Army, that wasn't exactly my thought process. But it's awkward because on the next level of awkwardness is because they're thanking you, but I'm not trying to sound like a hard ass or anything. It's some people didn't make it back.
Yeah.
And you're like, you should be thanking them. And that's kind of the second level of it. And the third level is there's, as wild as my job kind of was as a medic, there's always some other person out there like with a wilder job suffering more than you in the Army right now. Like there's some person in Afghanistan sleeping on a cold snow-capped mountain in sheer misery away from their family. And I am too old to do that now. So, and so when someone thanks me for my service, I'm like, oh man, I didn't do enough. Except, anyways, but So yeah, it's a complicated thing, and I'm sure
Sure.
I drug that out a bit too much, but
No. Actually, it kind of
yeah,
led me to another question, Brian. Again, like just reminding you, don't have to answer if you don't want to answer. That's perfectly
yeah.
fine, man. You mentioned that a lot of people have died. Those are the ones you should be thanking. Even though I had a rough job as a medic, there was always someone else. Do you feel like how do I put this? Do you feel as though instead of people thanking you, do you feel like it belittles your role that you played? Do you feel like you weren't not like important enough to thank, essentially?
A little bit, yeah. Like there's a lot of humble bragging going on, or in the future. This is a warning. There will be many humble brags in this whole interview. But yeah, it feels a little undeserved because from the outside looking in, before I was in the Army, I was like, yeah, these people are special, and then when you get in, you realize it's just a microcosm of America, and a lot is expected of you, and I think a lot of people out there could rise to the challenge of that vocation. I guess it's not it's a lifestyle, but
Yeah.
I think a lot of people they think they couldn't do it, but you kind of can. I think you could, generally, health permitting, et cetera. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Obviously, Brian, one of the things that you touched on, he said, well, it's actually a microcosm of America. And just to be completely transparent, I've never served. I didn't take up the call to arms when I was 18, whatever have you. So I never served in any branch. So when you say, well, it's actually just like a microcosm of America, what does that actually mean to those who've never served?
I don't want to besmirch the military, but
fair enough.
Because at the same time, like while I met some of the most amazing people in my life were in the military, and some of the best friends in my life, and very formative people in my life. It's still a government apparatus, and it is prone to kind of like the inefficiencies of a bureaucracy. And sometimes baddies slip through the cracks, and that is a reality that I kind of do want people to realize. This is going to sound super terrible, but not all veterans are worthy of admiration, and I guess we'll just leave it there. Sometimes, this is a quote from one of my sergeants. He said, "Sometimes the best soldiers make the worst civilians."
And I've heard that quote.
They kind of need to just remain in the Army, and they flourish there. I guess that's where I'll leave it without kind of besmirching it too much.
No, that's
because it did a lot for me. I suppose it was very formative in many ways for me, but this is reality we're talking about. But at the same time, I miss many parts of it. I guess we'll leave it at that. But
no, absolutely.
And I guess more to that question, it's the microcosm part. I kind of focus on the negative. I have a bad habit of that, but it's people from all walks of life, races, like ethnicities, even other nations, because that's a great way to get your citizenship kind of fast-tracked is, serve in our military.
Sure. Yeah.
So we actually, during deployments, we would have missions to drive people from our small base to a bigger base to get their they'd be getting their green cards. They'd be in Iraq being issued their green cards. And like a lot of Bruce Springsteen was played on the radio on the way out there. And it's just really wild stuff. And I thought that was really cool. Like, people from India, like Jamaica, just this big kind of like a true melting pot. So it's a microcosm of America in that sense too. I know your podcast is more, you try to keep it more lighthearted, and I do appreciate that, but times are wild right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the Army, at least in my experience, which is limited, racism was not at the forefront in my experience at all. Like, race didn't enter, or even race or gender didn't enter the equation. It's if you could execute or not. That was, and that's actually a good and a bad thing about the Army. Like, depending on how much you execute, that's how much humanity you were, like, how much human respect you were given, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense. Like,
it's like a true, like, meritocracy. I think
meritocracy. And generally, I mean, there's always exceptions, but that's what I felt generally. There was no race. There was just camaraderie. And at least amongst my unit, we had a really high, like, our unit had a lot of high morale, et cetera. And we trained well. When we executed pretty well, we deployed too. And it's just, that is the measure. You are measured by how much you execute. And that's one of the few beautiful things about the Army. But but yeah.
So overall, how many years did you serve again, Brian?
It was about 5. I think the last year was actually just kind of getting treated for cancer and floating around DC with whatever kind of task. And I guess I'm not sure what to call it, charity that they were giving me. Because, I mean, I was still in, but I didn't necessarily have to work for my pay at that point because I was a patient. But I got a lot of opportunities there, too. I got to work as an intern at the National Reconnaissance Office.
Whoa.
Yeah, I guess I didn't tell you about that. Yeah, more humble brags. I was not, this was just an internship. They, as part of the Wounded Warrior program, they try to set you up for a good transition into civilian life, et cetera. And so a lot of these companies in DC, they will fund your security clearance. And a top secret security clearance costs like, I don't even know what it costs nowadays, but I think mine had to be at least 20 or 30 grand.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's probably way up there.
Yeah, they send people out and they investigate pretty deep into your life. They physically interview people. I got a polygraph for, I forget what it is. It's like counterintelligence polygraph. So none of the sex, drugs, and rock and roll stuff. It's like, just like, hey, have you ever done anything detrimental to America's security, et cetera? And like, I was fully prepared to just lay it out on the table too. Like, I was like, yeah, I'm sorry. Like, I was super drunk that one night. Blah, blah,
Right?
blah.
Were you going like A Few Good Men? Like, you know what? You can't handle the truth.
Yeah, and like, this guy's like, he's doing the polygraph. He's like, no, this is not what it's about. And it was pretty wild. I learned that polygraphing is a bit of an art form. It depends on the person administering it, etc. The dude kept asking me a specific question like 7 times in a row. I'm like, man, why does he keep asking me this? And like, all I can remember is like, I really got to fart right now, and I don't want it to be let loose upon this poor unsuspecting person. And he was detecting the stress in my body. And he's like, you sure about that? You sure you didn't do this, and this? I'm like, yeah, man. And he's like, okay. And then we went back and then they asked you it again at the end to make sure that that wasn't a false positive or whatever. I was like, oh, no, dude, my guy. I just had to fart. That's all. But like, I'm not like, a insurrectionist.
Yeah, like, I swear to God, I'm not a Cuban drug lord. I just really got to cut one.
Yeah, generally. So there's a lot of opportunities there. And I forgot your primary question. What was
No,
that?
that's all right. It's just kind of, I like where the conversation's going. My next question, you answered just about the question in itself. You mentioned like how like the Wounded Warrior Project that you were part of and all of that stuff helps veterans or people current duty transition to civilian life. Do you feel like they gave you adequate skills? Even then, did you still feel kind of like fish out of water coming back to civilian life after doing what you were doing?
Sort of, because I was, I guess not exactly your typical case, because I went in like right after high school. Then as I was in the Army, like that was basically all I knew generally. Like I didn't know what the actual civilian workforce was like. Before that, I never really had a private job, civilian job. Like I would mow grass for the neighbors. That was about it generally. Sure. I'd never done an interview. I had never had to prep for an interview. I didn't even know the logistics of back in the day when you could call, and say, hey, I'm coming in, hand in your resume in person.
Right. What a foreign concept nowadays, by the way.
Etc. Yeah. This is a little bit of maybe besmirching the Army, but it's unavoidable with every job transition. There's certain information from your past job that is totally useless to your new job, utterly and completely useless. And the Army was just so much of a lifestyle that it felt like I spent, since I wasn't, I had planned on staying in a lot longer than the cancer kind of like put the kibosh on that. And so it just seemed like all this skill and expertise-ish, I guess you could call it expertise, but experience navigating the bureaucracy and all that jazz, like I put a bunch of time into that. Now it was useless. So that was difficult, but it's a hard question to answer. I think it's different for everyone. The opportunities were there, at least for me, just through different twists and turns. I did not end up staying in that line of work, which I should have. But anyways, that's another topic, I guess.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
We all should have just applied ourselves and been computer programmers and made a bunch of money, but generally, no big deal.
God, right? Jesus.
But
moving a little past this, kind of a way out of left field question. What's your favorite color, Bryan?
I am going to have to go with my boy John, and I think it's green.
Ooh, okay.
Mostly, but for way different reasons. I'm pretty colorblind, and green is one of the few colors I can like reliably identify. And I just like, I'm not exactly a outdoors expert, but I do like being in nature and outdoors and kind of hiking and stuff. And generally I don't know. I just enjoy green. Like, I think it looks good on me.
Well, being a fellow ginger, typically green does look good on us.
Because not a lot of colors do. I can't.
Exactly.
I'm pretty pale and neon, and I can't sport a wide palette if you will, in my fashion.
So
Yeah.
with the color green, is it, you mentioned you're not exactly like the outdoorsman, that idealistic like Bear Grylls survivalist kind of a dude, but is it just because the outdoors, the color green, does it bring like
Well, I
any
guess I'm
or
kind of like, that movie Rudy? Like he loves football, but he's kind of trash at it. That's me.
yes.
It's hard, man. And I don't think you quite know how hard it is until you try to do like ultralight backpacking, and with like, you go out there with this optimistic fantasy, like, yeah, I'm just gonna fish for my dinner, and I'm gonna get all my calories from nature. And then you're like, oh God, this is brutal. This is why we have a civilization. But I enjoy it, and I'm trying to orient more of my life around kind of like that homestead kind of lifestyle-ish, I guess.
Sure.
I'm angling there. It's hard, and maybe we can go into that deeper. It's difficult to break away from our system, I suppose, and do your own thing, unsupported by the system. When I say system, I mean our political, economic kind of surroundings, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's surprising how many laws and bylaws there are to like regulate such things, like in California, like catching rainwater for a water supply. Little things like that.
Yeah, that is part of the madness, and that is, not to get too political, but that is one of the big reasons I moved away from California. Which sucks, because it's such an amazing place. It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
And like, so many of the people I met there were really awesome. And it's just, to me, this is just me, it's a bit of a case study in how a bureaucracy can kind of ruin such a great thing. But I don't want to get too deep. I don't want to alienate too many of your people. Because you'll find that I'm like, more ego stuff about me, but I've got radical views kind of leaning in every different political direction, and it's kind of like a metronome. Like about 60% of that, I'm kind of in like a tolerable level, but I can sway radically from one way to the other. Like ecology and economics, like you don't even, if I were to type things, like people don't even know they're talking to the same person sometimes.
Yeah.
It's just like,
well, Bryan, that's honestly, you mentioned, and this is, I think, the second time or so, you're like, I don't want to alienate the listeners. Here's my thing. I like having conversations, not just with people with the same mindset, because that's just dull and that just gets boring, right?
yeah. Oh, yes.
It just, if you don't have thoughts, beliefs, even truths that you hold challenged from time to time in a environment in which you can have that conversation, not like an argument where you guys are fist fighting at the end of the night, but just a good conversation about different beliefs. And that's what I've always appreciated with you. Like, yeah, obviously you and I don't believe and don't see eye to eye on every single issue out there, but I appreciate how you stand by your values no matter what. Like, I could challenge, and we've had conversations before, challenge and discuss certain aspects, whether it be history, economics, whatever have you, but you've always held to your guns and said, okay, no. And you've always been respectful regarding an opposing person's viewpoints on certain things.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I do regret sometimes I get it. I feel like a bit too abrasive, and occasionally at a party or get together. But it's because I'm like genuinely interested in people, and I also ask invasive questions, and then put my 2 cents in probably where it shouldn't be. But I don't know. I don't know if you've read like Ender's Game. I don't know if you've read that. Yeah, it's kind of like something about that book just kind of resonated with me, and it's just weird that a dude's superpower could be empathy. Literally, like it's like, I'm sure he's smart as hell, but like he can empathize so well that he can guess what you're gonna do, and that's how he beats you. Like when he finally figures out so much about you that he loves you. Yeah. And then he beats you. Not to say that I'm trying to like dominate the planet, but
I'm going to kill you with my love, damn it.
Yeah. And like, but it's, so I just like, I'm a bit of an introvert, but I also have like a really deep interest in people's like stories.
Absolutely.
And, almost like Assassin's Creed, like how you can go back into someone's genealogy and like see what their ancestors were going through, et cetera, and be like, man, that would be like the wildest form of entertainment. Like that would be
oh, absolutely.
Yeah, anyways,
and honestly, like I'm gonna have a humble brag of my own, but that's why I started this little subsection of the Ludic Lounge cast here at the Ludic Lounge, the Ludic Lives portion, is because I have always held that same mindset where everyone has their own narrative. And while stories may be similar to other stories, everyone's individual story, their own narrative, is so unique. Because, you and I are both close to middle-aged white dudes with red hair, but your narrative, your story is it looks a hell of a lot different than my story. But from the outside, people are like, oh, they're cousins or brothers, so they're going to have the same kind of mindset, da-da-da. But it's just fascinating, and that's why I like having these sit-down talks with people I find interesting, like yourself, Bryan. It's just because your narrative is just a wild-ass narrative, and I mean that with the most utmost respect.
Yeah, and sometimes I was like, why the hell does he want me on this podcast generally? And I was like, don't get me wrong, this is like my dream. I've been like, ever since I've listened to a podcast, I was like, I want to be on a goddamn podcast. And I was like, wait a second, like, just the past 5 years of my life have been kind of crazy, much less, my adulthood, but humble brag. But humble brag, my life is complete chaos. No big deal. But yeah.
So you mentioned Ender's Game. Was that a book that you read as a younger person?
No. And
discovered it. Okay.
Sorry to interrupt you. I kind of caught what you were throwing out there, and it was not. I think I finally, maybe post college actually, and it seems like one of those books. Even if I had encountered it as a young kid, I'd have to revisit it to get the kind of the full thing. But I went deep into it. I did the whole series, like
nice.
Which no one really even knows exist. But
there are other books that come.
Yes, and like he wanted the flagship to be the second one. The prologue was just setting up, for Speaker for the Dead, and just everyone just kind of latched onto this Ender's Game thing. Even the military. It's like I think it's one of the few sci-fi books that's recommended reading for the Army's officer corps.
That's wild. I never knew that.
Yeah, the other being Starship Troopers.
Oh, of course.
Also a pretty wild book.
It is. Holy shit, is it?
Yeah.
So one question about, since you read it set at, currently in an adulthood or close to an adulthood age, what do you think younger Bryan would have took away from the message of Ender's Game versus what you took out of it when you actually read it, close to your age currently?
Man, that's hard. That's hard because young Bryan actually, I don't want to burn any future bridges, but I had a little problem with empathy. And with your credentials and bona fides, you may know more about this than I do psychologically, but it just seemed like teenage males around 14 or 15 might have a smidge trouble with empathy, like maybe all the hormones or just lack of life experience, etc. And this is going to sound super cheesy. It might have changed my trajectory a little bit. I definitely would have put my foot in my mouth less going forward in life had I read that. But I'm trying to think. Say it again. So what would young Bryan?
Yeah, sorry. It was a convoluted as fuck question.
Yeah.
So essentially, like, if you would have discovered Ender's Game and like you were talking about the message of empathy and what that looks like, I mean, not that that's the only message within that book.
Oh, no. Yeah, there's a lot.
But just picking that particular one, a younger Bryan, let's say aged like 12, 13, versus the Bryan that actually read it for the first time, I guess in your 20s at some point?
Sure. Yes. No, I had a much higher appreciation for life in my 20s. This was like post-Iraq, post-cancer, and just getting to like encounter more people generally in life. And that's, yeah, I don't know, I guess that's generally where it's at. And I think that may be the crux of, cause like, this is gonna sound so terrible, but like when I was a young teenager, like you watch a Disney movie, you're like, okay, that was a Disney movie. Now, like at the end of Moana, I'm like, just like desperately trying not to tear up in a public movie theater.
Oh,
or like Coco or whatever. Like,
God dang. Don't even talk to me about Coco.
Yeah, man. Like I'm in like,
God.
We're like watching this. We're in a theater, in the cheap theater, and it's Coco. We're in California. We're in a rural California county, so there's a lot of Mexican people there, and a lot of tough looking dudes in there with their families watching Coco. Totally unexpected, just blindsided with this emotional freaking blitz that this movie is about, like family and like sticking together and honoring your elders and shit. And they're all like putting sunglasses on, like trying not to look like they're crying and stuff. And I'm like, oh man, this is wild. And like that would not happen to not like 17-year-old Bryan. And now it's anyways.
Yeah, I mean, well, you kind of touched upon the message, and again, I'm not going to bore the audience at home with, as you so call it, my bona fides, but essentially it's tough. And again, this can take so many different levels, but essentially what I find interesting in the psychological realm is especially men's health, because me being a man, I've gone through a lot of the same stuff you mentioned. And that's a thing that society, and again, it's getting a little bit different nowadays, but society as a whole typically is, with men, it's more of that kind of machismo culture where you're not allowed to cry. It's one of those, like, we'll give you something to cry about if you're sitting here displaying weakness. And it's the only emotions that men, especially younger men from an early age, are taught is that you can show aggression, which is confused with passion. And pretty much outside of that anger, the aggression, that passion, that's just about it. You can have joy. You can have joy up to a certain degree because you have to be this humble young man. You can't be just this overconfident, cocky young shit. But outside of those two emotions, the emotional vocabulary of men, especially younger men, they're never, or I shouldn't say never, but there's rarely a growth in that. It's always typically stunted. Not to say that's an excuse for why men act a certain way, not at all, because everyone's their own individuals with their own individual feelings and meanings, and et cetera, et cetera. But typically speaking, generically speaking, it's such a shitty thing that younger men have to go through. And it kind of stunts a lot of things all the way through adulthood, honestly, because patterns, they recycle, they reciprocate. And I know that was a tangent.
No, I'm deep in the tangent right now. And I have a few of my friends, I have a bad habit of like taking my layman's perspective and experience over their actual expertise. And as you're saying that, it seems like it's like a leftover kind of thing in humanity's evolution, I guess, like you could say, where that was kind of our job. And like, I don't want to rip on us as males too much, but like generally our job was to kind of like spread genetics and execute and maybe die. Like you don't need a lot of males in the tribe generally, you know what I'm saying? Like females were much more important, I guess, to your population stability. But like, yeah, because like, you know, you got to think about it, like paleolithically, we're going out and hunting mammoths, and my buddy just got stomped to death by a mammoth, and I got to go out and do it again in like 4 days. Maybe dwelling on it isn't super useful. It's not healthy. I get it, because I encountered a lot of that in the military generally, like at least after my first deployment. And emotionally, like, yeah, that's just a debt that you're going to have to figure out how to pay later on. But in the moment, you know, and this is even more of a tangent, but I find that we live in a civilization that values harmony, and, well, maybe not right now, but typically like harmony, nonviolence, but we're still flawed humans. We're kind of like, our hardware is still pretty tribal and aggressive. And civilization, I don't know if you've read Guns, Germs, and Steel, but civilizations have a habit of incarcerating or killing the uncivilized. And yeah, so and I'm not trying to like, you know, like, oh, woe is us, poor males. Sure. But it is a different sort of navigation that you have to go through, like given the hardware kind of that we have still running through our veins. I would say like, the hormones versus what society expects us to be. I definitely see the point, and I believe that there's some merit to that.
What I also believe, though, is, and again, you'd probably agree with this, that can also change within a person. Like, even if you say, if you believe in the thought process of men are hardwired or biologically hardwired this specific way, just the acknowledgement, like you mentioned, like it's not healthy, but as long as you're taking ownership and knowing that it's not healthy and actively trying to make a change, right?
Oh, yes, sir.
Yeah, yes. It's one thing to say like, oh yeah, that's one of my toxic traits. And this isn't just for men. I mean, now it's just in general people.
Humanity.
Yeah, in humanity. It's one thing to say, oh yeah, this is just one of my toxic traits. I'm just this way, and not taking ownership and not taking responsibility for it. That's the other portion of it, to where it's like, yeah, I understand that, you know, men are trash, I guess, is a simplified way to say. Men can be trash, but we can also be so much better if we just invest the time in ourselves and do that work.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off. I think, at least in my life, and like, I think it's, and maybe this can segue into a different subject, but at least from what I learned from my father, it's all about directed energy. Like, sure, we'd like to kind of divest ourselves from like our genes and our flaws and our physical foibles, but you can direct that. You can use that to have a really good influence on the world, I think, generally. And I think what you're saying is like you kind of want to grow that toxicity into something that is not toxic, that is fertile for human life. And
yeah, I mean,
I think that's basically growing up. Now I'm really lecturing your people right now, but because I feel like we're born, all humans were born as kind of selfish little barbarians, and then we need to. Luckily, though, we can learn and reprogram ourselves. That's like the beauty of humans, I think.
No, definitely. One of the things, Bryan, I wanted to touch upon, the previous question was kind of like young Bryan versus current Bryan. What were you passionate about, and what was younger Bryan passionate about?
I am not sure, actually. I just kind of had like this kind of like this churn of kind of wants and goals, I guess, maybe. Loosely, you could use the word goals loosely. I just knew I got a good role model in my parents. I knew I wanted to be capable at something, and I wanted to. This is gonna sound weird. I feel like I was born in like with an old person's soul. I know that sounds cheesy and hippie and crunchy, but I remember being 14 years old and thinking like, man, I'm gonna get married and have a kid. Like this is gonna be the thing I do. Yeah, and like that was kind of set in my mind. I know that sounds kind of antiquated. And then later on in life, I kind of figured out more and more that the people that came before me they put a lot of effort into like staying alive and maintaining existence until and then setting me up for a good life and setting me up for success. And it's almost like in Star Wars, how Rogue One was like spawned with that one line. It's like a lot of good people died for this information.
Yeah.
A lot of good people died to freaking give you an easy life, Ryan. Maybe you should, try and pass it on a bit. It's like, okay, sure.
So is that more so of a guilt from you then? Is it like a guilt-driven?
No,
not
okay. Really. I don't think so. I don't find it that way. It makes me feel good and proud to continue the people that I love and found to be, what's the word, formative, or just everyone around me. Like I felt it was kind of like behoove. It was what's the word? I'm losing my words now, but it behooved me to kind of like pass it on generally.
Sure.
But as far as passions, I don't know. Like I felt like I consumed a bit too much art entertainment, like, video games, reading, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Dungeons and Dragons, way too much of that, way too much Baldur's Gate, et cetera. But I just knew that I maybe this is just every male ever, but I just wanted to be capable, respected by my peers. And I didn't have, it sounds really terrible. Like I'm so interested in everything that I could go either way, like wherever fate would take me. And that's kind of part of the, some people could call it stupid. Some people call it like patriotic, but I enlisted in the Army that's about 40% of the reason I enlisted in the Army was just to see what was out there generally. Yeah.
See, I mean, it's a free ticket to see other places in the world, essentially.
Yeah. Yep. It was a pretty wild ride. So, I keep, sorry to keep looping back to that. I feel like there's more important stuff.
No, not at all, man.
Post Army.
It's your platform, man. You do what you want.
Yeah. All right. Maybe one day we'll have an episode 2, but if we get likes, whatever. Did I answer the question at all?
Yeah. No, you're doing great, man. This is fine. Right. So one of the things, like you mentioned Baldur's Gate, you mentioned D&D, you mentioned a lot of those other fun things. Did you carry some of those same interests, hobbies, whatever have you, like throughout your teenage years and even to where you stand now?
Oh yeah, like that may be one of the most effective critiques of me right now. I was born with an old soul, but I kind of still act like a big kid occasionally. And that's the constant kind of balancing act I kind of feel in my life. It's like self-development versus consuming art and entertainment. It's just sometimes when you consume too much of it, you're like, oh crap, like I want to be in the world. I don't want to just be observing it. And but yeah, I still get down a lot of video games. I had a console in a while. I'm more on the PC side these days.
Yeah, you're not console trash like me. I get it.
Yes, plebs. But it's more of another foible of mine. I kind of like to have it my own way, and I'm super critical of bureaucracies, even though I know why they are the way they are, and et cetera. And I have a complicated relationship with the federal government, politically, yada yada. But that's one of the reasons I'm on PC is because like you can make kind of a mediocre game, but then humans of the world will come out of the woodwork and mod that shit into the perfect, like Skyrim. Like I'll boot up Skyrim right now, no big deal. And it's pretty amazing, I think. Like, so people like, the company will make like a base level game, and then these other humans, they're like, oh, I think this part of the game was crap. I'm gonna make it better. Oh, me too. And then like just almost this strange connection to this random Russian person that I've never met.
Yeah, it's
And,
kind of like a sense of community, essentially, right?
Yeah,
it's everyone with that
sure.
same interest, that same passion, and it's like you said, it's kind of like the military. It doesn't matter race, creed, ethnicity, anything like that.
Yep.
It's just everyone sharing this one passion, and that's
Yep.
like,
You have immediate common ground with a lot of people, and that's my wife struggles with that a little bit. Like, she doesn't enjoy how much my kid is 2 and he's already playing video games, which is it's a little fast for me, not to lie. But there's something about that. Like 30% of my vocabulary came from freaking Japanese RPGs and shit, and so it's like I got a lot of reading done thanks to video games.
All right,
and,
so I'm gonna derail this motherfucker for a minute. What was your favorite JRPG? What would you say, like, all-time favorite JRPG?
And that's the thing. Like, as I grew up, I moved away from that more to the Western stuff, like D&D based kind of things.
Oh, totally.
So, like, Baldur's Gate 2 specifically is the seminal work of art as far as RPGs, as far as I'm concerned. I know that's like such a boomer mentality now. It's like, oh, the 64 Chevy, best car ever. It's like, yeah, dude, deal with it. Baldur's Gate 2. But
for sure,
Final Fantasy VII is pretty wild. I think it could be a novel. You could separate the plot from the game entirely, and it could be a standalone novel, I think.
Oh yeah, well, the Final Fantasy VII alone hits like so many different fucking themes. It's crazy. Yep. You have eco-terrorism. You can touch on
baby.
That. I mean, essentially,
like corporatism, like kind of this corporate dystopia thing. And what's wild is this is for anyone who hasn't even played it yet. This might be a bit of a spoiler, but
spoiler.
Yeah, spoiler alert, huge spoiler. But I didn't figure a lot of this out until I was in the military, and oh man, I'm really not trying to sound edgy, like an edgelord right now, but like, you lose friends, and Cloud is the main character, right?
Yep.
And he takes over his best friend's persona. Like, he was just some kind of pleb, and then his buddy died, and then he died in battle or whatever. Zach, I think it was.
Yeah.
And so he literally takes over his persona and imitates him in every way and becomes him so much that this Zach's ex-girlfriend is like, she sees Cloud and she's like, you remind me of someone. Like, yeah, that one dude that you were in love with. No big deal. Yeah. And I literally am him. Like, and it was weird to me because like he wanted his friend to keep living, and so he imitated him. And I don't know. And I know it sounds kind of weird, but I'm 2 beers in, and that's just what I feel like talking about right now.
No, I mean, it makes total sense. Like, he's trying to, and it kind of ties back to some of the themes you brought up earlier, Brian, about, he's trying to pay homage to his fallen comrade. He's trying to carry on the memory of this person. And just hearing you talk about it, it's almost like he lost a piece of himself. Cloud dedicated himself so much to trying to emulate his best friend. Even you can make the argument for that he ends up losing himself and losing perspective.
Like, he almost kills himself in a way.
Yeah.
Like, he's so much of Zach that there's no more Cloud.
Yeah.
But yeah, to segue a bit too, it's like, or to segue back to what I was talking about, that's the value that I kind of found a lot in video games. And I'm really excited for my son to grow up in that. I want to shepherd him through that stuff, I guess. Like, kind of like my dad would show me old John Wayne movies. Like, I'm going to be like, son, screw that 3D trash. This is Secret of Mana. You're doing this, right? Me, you, and your mother. One of the only 3-player games on Super Nintendo. You're going to deal with it. like, it's a good thing you like video games, because I don't care. If you hated them, we're still doing it.
You're going to play Secret of Mana, and you're going to like it, damn it.
God damn it. Mostly because it's only 3 megabytes, and it's free on the internet. Light it up.
So, talking about things that from that period of time in your life, you already kind of touched on it a little bit in an indirect way, but I'd like to kind of follow up with this question. What do you think stuck with you from that period in your life? You mentioned your family. You mentioned some of those thoughts and emotions that you had as far as them like leaving you a legacy to kind of fulfill, to take the reins of. Was there anything else, or was that the main takeaway you think from that?
That was a large part of it. And I just, my father taught me the value of a good father. It's weird. He just did it so naturally. And I have like this weird intellectual overthinkingness about what I'm doing. And he would just kind of do it. Granted, he was this is a little racy, but I think he's autistic. Like, back then they didn't really care about, the spectrum, but I'm pretty sure he's got some sort of autism. He has the ability to like laser beam focus on things, and but it's weird. It's really weird in a certain way. He kind of had a gruff way of doing things, and it was just it made the world not seem so hard, because he would just kind of be like, all right, I'm just gonna do this, all right, and like and that actually took me really far into the Army. Not to make it all about the Army again, but it's pretty formative for me. But a lot of guys had trouble in basic, and and women, people generally, like, there's a thing in the Army, it's called a failure to conform, and that just kind of means like you couldn't deal with all the bullshit, like the heaping scoops of bullshit that are dumped upon you in basic to prepare you for the real bullshit that comes later. And
that was diet doctor bullshit that you
this is simply basic training, and like, media and like the Discovery Channel makes basic training seem like that's the hardest point in your career. No, it's not. As you go on, the military expects more of you. The basic training is literally just basic, and I was a little intimidated, but then when I got into it, I realized like these drill sergeants aren't as demanding as my father, and they're not like I played football in high school, and like aside from the running, the endurance stuff, it wasn't as hard as high school football. We had a brutal program in my high school. Like, they were super competitive. They were, I don't know. It's a weird situation. Small school competing with big schools, trying to look good, etc.
Yeah.
But the nuance from kind of like the games and the art that I consumed also kind of, it allowed me to keep my head on straight, I guess, during all that stuff. Like, because I don't know. It's weird. The Army tries to kind of, make you less of an individual so you can assimilate into the team. The team is the real element, not the individual.
Would you say that it's almost like a hive mind mentality, or is it?
It is a little weird, because we'll get a little political, because all these people, not all these people, but a certain element in society is like they're attracted to Marxism, and I say join the Army, my dude. see how that works out for you, because that's basically the only country ruining case study that I can find of Marxism. Like, usually it kind of decimates the nation that it is implemented in generally. Yeah. But if you want to experience having someone have complete control over your life, that's one of the ways to do it. You can't, in a certain way, until you reach a certain rank, you are government property. You'll be held in a bit of contempt if you injure yourself. That's how kind of wild it is. Like, I would get a sunburn and like, hey, sorry, like, I'm moving slow today, I got a sunburn. And there'd be some serious judgment coming down on me, like, you just damaged government property, son. Like, what are you thinking? You didn't use SPF 90?
You goddamn ginger, you soulless bastard.
I'm sorry if I'm being a bit negative on it, because there are a lot of massive formative effect on me, and
well, yeah, you joined when you're 18, man. Like, for it to not have any impact on your life, that would be the more surprising aspect of it.
Yes. We'll just say I learned from its good points, and I learned from its flaws. And I'll try to put that one to rest. But no.
So this is going to be completely out of right field this time. How do you, Bryan? How do you define love?
Oh, I knew this was coming. You hit John with this, and I was like, God damn it, this great. So you're going to hit me with a question that like scholars and philosophers have been mulling over for 3,000 years. No big deal.
Yes, no big deal. But this is how Bryan, the philosopher.
Yeah, I'm just glad you didn't hit me with what is justice. But anyways, because that's brutal. Socrates couldn't figure that one out, so I don't think I can either. Love. So I've got kind of this duality, like that metronome thing I was talking about, with where I have two radicals, and eventually they kind of come into a sensible median. On the one hand, we've got kind of like the evolutionary biology thing. It's a bunch of chemicals kicking around, and it's a really amazing way for humans to survive under wild conditions. Like, like back in the day, we're like dealing with bears that are like as tall as horses, etc. And like, you really gotta you gotta be down with the tribe. Like, you gotta be one for all and all for one, etc. Musketeer style. But on the other hand, it's maybe it's not the other hand. Maybe it's the same thing. It's probably being selfless and altruistic to something.
Okay.
I don't know if I can call it like a passion thing. because that would kind of restrict love to just like a romantic relationship, I guess, or a marital thing, matrimony type of thing. Because I feel like you can love things that aren't even people. You know what I'm saying? Like you can love ideas and activities, etc. So, but if we're restricting it to people, I would say it's just kind of something that you would like. You don't act selfishly, that you give it to people, I suppose. And but in the hopes that they kind of feel that and receive it and reciprocate it, I suppose. Maybe. I don't know. I don't know if I'll put all the conditions on it, but it's I think it's a two-way thing generally. But
sure.
Yeah.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, and please feel free to tell me if I'm way out of my fucking mind. Essentially, it's this sense of selflessness, but to like, if again restricting it to just two people or a community, something like that, restricting it to the point where it's two people or multiple people all acting out of selflessness for the betterment of a common goal or a common theme.
Yeah, and like, to be honest, I haven't worked it out myself yet. I think John said, man, I'm stealing from him. You kind of know it when you feel it, I guess. You know it when you see it, but I think specifically that, like, you know it when you feel it. And I'm open to the argument from more cynical people that, oh, it's just a bunch of chemicals, yada yada. But hey, man, like that's the world we live in. Like, it's just a bunch of microbes and chemicals. So let's party. But and frickin'. So,
all right, I want that on fucking bumper sticker, by the way.
It's all just microbes and chemicals. It's like Rick and Morty. Like, they're bureaucrats, Morty. I don't respect them. Blah blah blah. So I think because I guess the main point, I feel like it should be. Some people will call this conditional. I think it should be reciprocal. Like, you give it and you feel it, and that's at least with people, because this is it's a big topic, but
one thing you touched upon that kind of piqued my interest, you mentioned that you know it when you feel it. So you would agree, even though it's like chemicals firing, all of those fun things, there is an emotional aspect to it.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think that is a big part of what I think that was one of the bigger benefits that I actually got out of the Army, was the friends. And like, it is, especially when you're deployed, it's very simple. Like why you're there, you have an express purpose. And granted, like, as I grew up and went to college, that the nuance kind of diluted that a bit. But when young Bryan was in his unit, and it was very simple. I did not feel conflicted. I felt I was where I should be. Even though I was in a war zone, I felt that's the safest I've kind of felt in my life, because I got 50 dudes. I love them. They love me. And they're trained fighters. And if you're trying to do harm to me, you will have to go through 49 of them. And I'm sure that is something primordial in humans. Like, after feeling it and being there with that, that is kind of one of my goals. I'm trying to like replicate that in my neighborhood now, like locally. That is, now that I finally settled down and kind of shed this gypsy lifestyle, this nomadic lifestyle, now I want to, because this is going to make me sound so cheesy and shallow, but I think belonging is super important. Like, feeling belonging to something. And I think it's a quote from Aristotle. I think it's, I'm going to butcher this, but who cares? It's in Greek, so no one really knows what he was saying. But it's in ancient Greek, so whatever. I think it's, if a man does not need society, he is either a beast or a god. I think that's about it. And basically, it's like, you're not human, is what he's saying. Like, if you don't need society, yeah, there's just, and I am the quintessential kind of like, I don't want to say recluse, but I don't like cities generally. Like, I prefer the outer edges as far as like a population goes. Like, as far as population density, I prefer it to be low-ish, but still high enough to where I can just roll into Costco or Walmart and get all the crap I need and have sweet internet. But and even then, I think it's pretty vital. You gotta have some sort of society generally.
So I feel as though there's a difference, however, between society and that community that you were mentioning.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I'm trying to not be too provocative or triggering, but I think tribal is the word I'm looking for. But in a good way, because I think it like if you're healthy psychologically, then you interact with even people who aren't in your tribe, like, or that you don't consider in your tribe. You will interact with them in a much more positive light if you're just psychologically complete and emotionally complete. And this is an opinion. This is not a fact. I'm still kind of living through this whole life thing and figuring it out as I go. But yeah, because there's always this kind of like, at least in my brain, there's this tribalism versus universalism kind of spectrum going on, whereas like, okay, you should just kind of like, I guess the tenets of universalism is like, hey, you should like everyone equally, or I don't know. I'm not even sure what their tenets are, but there's negative connotations with tribalism, I guess, like to where, how dare you elevate certain people above other ones in your own mind? It's like, well, I don't know. That's humanity. I don't know what to say. Like, I don't expect the same from anyone else. But anyways, sorry, I'm rambling now.
No, I understood the thought process, and
yeah,
that's an interesting concept that you brought.
I'm not going to force people to care about me, and like I think there's been some science and some studies shown that we can only kind of our brains, we can only kind of really truly care about 150 people. Like that's 150, 200, I think. I don't know if you've read that at all, but
it was somewhere around that.
Yeah, pretty interesting. And it's, I think it was in context of like people who have like 2,000 Facebook friends. It's just like, yeah, my guy, you don't remember half of them. But yeah, I don't know. I just so I'm definitely rambling now.
No, it's all right, man. One thing, so you mentioned that your gypsy lifestyle is pretty much at an end, and you're trying to build up your tribe, your community, whatever phrasing you want to attach to that. Do you feel as though it can be truly the same as it was for you in the Army?
No, mostly because I've changed. I've developed a lot more nuance and world experience. Generally, I was my frame of reference was just so penned in due to youth and lack of experience. And it's you can only get that sort of focus when the government is kind of making you. I don't know if that makes sense. Like they're handling everything else. Like they controlled so much of your life, but the one thing you can't control is the interpersonal relationships you got with the people around you. And so you just double down on that. Like you're with each other so much. Like, and it's just not possible. I was with the people in my unit about 2.5 more, like about 250% more than I am with my own wife nowadays. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like we worked together, we hung out together in our off time. Literally everything. Like some of these people, like I slept in the same room as them, like we roomed together, we cohabitated. I don't think anything in civilian life really can reproduce that unless you're living in a commune somewhere out in Montana. I mean, it'd be awesome. I think that'd be an interesting thing for Americans to do, but yeah, I could not reach that again.
Yeah. Where do you think the balance lies between wanting that sense of belonging, and that tribalism, kind of like you were mentioning and touched upon earlier? What do you think the balance is between that and still being an individual?
I'm not sure, because it's hard. It's a little bit of siloing, I think, unfortunately, because you're going to have a bit of confirmation bias. This is just me speaking like realistically as a human. Like I think you're going to, actually I'll walk that back a bit. It's because you're an individual, but then part of your individual kind of makeup and yearning is to also be part of something. So you will give up a bit of that to satisfy that need, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And it's not like in a perfect world, you would have a way to voluntarily associate with who you want to. So hopefully you're not sacrificing a whole lot of yourself to become part of a group, because that is unhealthy, I think.
Yeah.
Personally, if you're wanting the world according to Bryan, because I have a terrible habit of that. Like if something like rubs me the wrong way, it's like, I'm out, bye. Like I've done it before. Like I'll put 3 states between me and you just because you pissed me off, bye. And I am prone to that. So yeah, it is a difficult balance. I'm not even gonna pretend that I have it figured out, but I think there is a good return on investment when you just give up a little bit for a finite amount of people. I think you'll get, and it's almost like this is very strange to think about, but basically it's like if you're kind of selfless, you do some selfless stuff. That let's say you do it for like 10 people, like instead of just having yourself to rely on, now you have 10 other people that can help you out, I suppose, in times of need. And it's almost all about like that exact moment, that time of need, the crunch time.
Right.
Like you've put in all, like you've kind of like, sure, let's say in video game terms, you've spent like 10 social capital points like per month over a year. So that's 120 social capital points. And it's like, oh crap, I'm in a crisis. This will cost me like a certain amount of stuff. Like, no. You just spend 80 social capital points, my dude, and your friends will help you out. Yeah. And yeah. No, I'm definitely rambling. I'm 3 years in. My apologies.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And one thing I want to challenge about that, if you don't mind, is you mentioned like having to sacrifice a little part of yourself for the greater good, in a sense. No, you didn't say the greater good, but essentially, from what I'm taking away from it, and again, correct me if I'm 100% wrong, or even 80% wrong, it's sacrificing a little part. And the thing I want to challenge is if you're sacrificing even a little part of yourself, like stifling that little part of yourself, are you truly building a sense of a community where, you know, this person or these people accept you for who you are as an individual?
I would say it depends, I suppose.
Okay.
Depends on how much because I think it depends on the culture of that community. Like if that community is literally based around you having individual freedom, like maybe potentially this is my libertarian anarchist fantasy playing out, but they would understand like, hey, they'd empathize like, hey, this dude and his family, like they want the same things I do, and so I'm not going to like HOAs upset me. Just I don't understand why. It's just like another layer of bureaucracy that people just put upon themselves. I'm like, oh my God, this is crazy. I would think that they, like if that is one of your common goals is to kind of respect people's individual freedoms, I think it could work. But I fully admit that the whole stateless society is a fantasy at this point. But I like the dream. I like dreaming it. But and I know that's a whole nother tangent, but that's kind of where it's leaning towards is what is the return investment on how much you give up, I guess, is what I'm trying to tease out. And I would say like giving up 10% to get 50% back is realistic, it's possible, and I think that's just kind of human history generally. Like we've always, at least in my nerdy studies about survivalists, like mountain men, etc., like they would always die young because there's no division of labor.
Sure.
But I mean, so if this dude's like a cantankerous, rugged individualist and he's just not going to live with anyone because it's annoying or something, like, cool, all right, you can die at 45, have fun with that.
Yeah, exactly.
And like, or like you can just give a little bit and, you know, have a fuller life, I guess. And I want to caveat that with like, I don't like I had to make it all about me. I don't enjoy the totalitarian collectivism that is kind of pervading a lot of things lately, if that makes sense.
Okay.
There's a bit of like, oh, we're doing this for the greater good or for the public or the people. It's like, who is that? Like, because like no one within 5 miles, a 5-mile radius of me enjoys these things. And you are saying it's for the people. I am always skeptical of that because collectivism kind of couches totalitarianism. It just kind of obfuscates a totalitarian power grab. A lot, at least in my studies and my experience, etc.
I understand the thought process behind what you're saying.
I don't want to lean too far, like, oh, sacrifice everything for the greater good, suicidal altruism, blah blah blah. Yeah. Like that's definitely not inaccurate.
But one thing, I mean, obviously you're not talking to the extreme of what you just mentioned, but you mentioned if putting 10% in, expecting 50% back. But in this scenario you mentioned, and I hate to use the word scenario, but it's the one that's coming to mind. But in this scenario you're mentioning, what happens if you give that 10% and you're only getting 45% back?
I am not sure. I have not quite figured that out. Not going to lie. And that's kind of the thing that I'm struggling with, because I'll kind of deal with this in terms of like libertarian and anarchism, I guess. And anarchism has a lot of baggage attached to it. So, and so much, in fact, that like a lot of the people have kind of switched over to this new word called voluntarism, and it's not as sexy. It doesn't sound as cool at all, but whatever. And basically, it's just generally a stateless kind of way of being. And I think it is a bit of a fantasy, but it's almost like when you're chasing perfection, that's kind of how you improve, I guess, right? Like, it's not like, oh, I'm gonna shoot to get a C on this exam. Like, you probably, I don't know if you'll get that high. Like, if you try to shoot for an A and get like a B plus, like, hey, all right, that's more than we asked for.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of more of chasing the ideal. I don't think we'll ever get there, but it'd be cool if we could. But
it's more so like shooting for the moon, and even if you miss, you're still amongst the stars, essentially.
Yeah. Yes. True. That is a great quote. And so in that sense, it's as you peel away kind of the government control that we kind of have, the state, I suppose, and the kind of coercion, the inefficiency of the bureaucracy, like more responsibility becomes incumbent on each individual. And I think this would be my hope that when these other individuals see you going out of your way to put in that 10%, that they also put in 10%. And it's kind of a dumb way to think about it because, like, hey, I'm doing these things. Other humans will see the value and also do these things. And I guess it's more of a leap of faith, I suppose. But right now, that's something I'm okay with, just because I'm interested in people generally.
Yeah.
And
no, absolutely.
I hope I answered some part of that question.
Oh, yeah. Essentially, I'm putting time and my own time, my own emotional capability, capacity, whatever have you. And I hope you're doing the same for me. Obviously, I'm putting forth the work, putting forth the effort. I hope you're doing the same and reciprocating that, right? It goes back to the...
Yep, generally. And hate to sound like a tool, but generally the people that don't do that, if they're takers, you just kind of voluntarily don't associate with them. And I think there's a lot of individual power in that, like with the ability to hang out with people or be around and frequent people that you want to, I guess.
Yeah. Essentially, it's what you're saying is creating a boundary, right? You're identifying that this particular person is taking more than they're giving, and that's even after you've had that heart-to-heart saying, hey, look, I'm giving, and you're taking, and there's no equal partage in that, because that's what a relationship's built off of, right? You take some, you give some. The way it was described to me, essentially, which is, I think, it's kind of a simplistic view, obviously, but I always enjoyed it. It's like everyone's holding their own bouquet of roses or flowers, whatever have you. And each person you want to have an active relationship with, you give them a rose. And there's some people in this world that'll just keep taking those roses from you, keep taking those flowers from you to where you are holding none left. In an idealistic world, for every rose you take, you get one back. And if there's not enough balance, if you keep taking everyone's roses, they're not all going to fit in your hand and you're going to get poked by a thorn at some point. And on the flip side, if you're giving away all your roses, now you're completely empty. So it goes back to that idea of balance, about having that boundary set of, hey, I'm going to take a rose from time to time, but I'm going to most definitely give you a rose back. And that takes many different forms, obviously, because that goes as far as communication and all of that other jazz. But now I digress.
Yep. No, this is why we're a dangerous pairing. Like, and if John gets too close to us, it's like uranium in a nuclear bomb. It's like, oh no, look out, Tangent City. like the 11th dimension, like we broke through the 4th wall onto the 7th wall. Like, oh God.
Oh man. So Bryan, we talked about how you define love and the intricacies of that. When is the first time that you can remember that you fell in love with an idea of a person, or just a person in general? Again, you don't have to get too deep or anything, but when did that idea first plant in your head going, this makes sense to me. This is how I'm receiving love, or this is how I'm understanding love via this vehicle or via this person, whatever have you. Vehicle, not like a car, obviously. Vehicle meaning like the catalyst of what we're talking about.
That is a mega difficult question. I'm trying to keep it a little brief. I guess we'll restrict it to interpersonal relationships, I suppose. Because, like, not gonna lie, I was a huge nerd in high school, and there's a lot of I still am a huge nerd. I'll walk that back. But And like maybe like a lot of people listening, we can tend to get a bit immersed in a virtual world for everyone's own reason they do that. And so I think there's a bit of love in that, I suppose. But as far as interpersonal stuff, it's I think you develop. I grew through phases, I suppose, and in my younger life, it was difficult to separate infatuation from love. And in fact, it's almost like for a while, the only difference I could find was in love is infatuation that keeps going after 2 years, basically, like after you've run out of all the honeymoon chemicals, etc. I just remember when I was younger, love felt a little out of control. Like I wasn't totally in control. Like I was out of character, doing things you would normally do, etc., etc. And but as I grew older and more like comfortable in my own skin and had a better idea of what I wanted, it's the love felt less. This is gonna sound a little psychotic. It felt less intense, but it was deeper on a bunch of different levels. Like obviously I've had partners throughout my life, and then I found the one, my wife, and then we had a child. And it doesn't feel as intense as some of the other stuff when I was younger, but that might have been a symptom of just being young. And right now, but nothing can prepare you for, like, I know it sounds so cliche, but nothing prepares you for the feeling of when you decide to join with someone and you're like, hey, everything in my life, we are one. Like my goals are your goals, vice versa. And then now we have a life form and now our goals totally shift again and to developing this life form into the best that it can be. Like that is nothing I felt. As crazy as it was back when my hormones were raging and like my body was young and virile.
When you're young, dumb, and full of cum?
Nothing compares to when I look at this kid and he's like, Dada, and he does like a freaking front flip off the couch. I'm like, yes, excellent. You are my most favorite creation. And so it's weird. And I guess that's the evolution of my my feeling of it. I don't know if that made any sense at all, but yeah. And I think once you finally kind of it's almost like you're thrown into a pool, like with your emotions, and then you get your little floaties and you're kicking and screaming and just trying to like stay afloat, and then you're like, oh, look at that, I can just kind of settle down. And then once you're at a calm, complete state, then the real love, you can feel the real love that the people around you have. I guess it was hard to detect that.
Yeah,
with all the turmoil of
it's well said, honestly.
Yeah.
So Bryan, when you daydream, what does it look like? Is it like a flippant daydream, or is it more of like a recurring one or a recurring theme? What does that look like for you?
I am not sure, because this is sound unhealthy and escapist, but a lot of it is wrapped up in the art that I'm consuming, like the games and the series, etc. Like been rewatching The Witcher, pretty solid. I enjoy that a lot. Yeah, and but so it'll oscillate between these kind of try to get something, try to extrapolate something philosophically useful out of this fictional stuff and bring it into the real world. That's kind of a bad habit of mine. I don't know if that's like a Jungian psychology archetypes type of thing. Couldn't even tell you. But so there's that, and then I have this. You could call it a form of PTSD, but I think other veterans will just call it being on point generally. But to civilians, it's kind of like this dude is a freak. But I daydream a lot about trying to make my family more physically secure in terms of their physical safety and their food security and basically everything that your grandparents did during the Great Depression. I'm trying to, like, the only way to reach the goal, I feel like, is to envision it and imagine it. And that's a lot what I do. Right. Like a garden and all the chickens and rabbits that we will be raising in the future, et cetera. Like basically trying to turn the suburbs into a homestead, much to the chagrin of our neighbors. But sorry, guys. You'll enjoy it when you got fresh eggs, so they'll be all right.
There you go.
They'll deal with it. But,
so is that by essentially taking that, would you call it like a protector role?
I don't know.
Because it almost sounds like it's like a protector role, but there's more to it than that.
Because I don't consider myself a tough guy. I'm not a badass. Like, I was just in support of the badassery. That was my whole Army career. I was a medic. Like, my job was to hide until people got hurt, and then I'd just sprint in and just slide in like a baseball player. It's like stealing first base. Like, oh, I'm here. Let's do this. And put my nerdy autism to use in some sort of productive way. But so I don't consider myself a tough guy, but it's almost like there's that Nietzsche quote, like I think it's beware when you're fighting monsters because you may become one, etc. And I just, not trying to say, again, I'm not a badass, but I saw kind of what the negative side of tribalism looks like in Iraq, and I don't ever want it to happen here, but at the same time I don't want my family to suffer for it, especially since I've learned so much about it. It's almost like if I'm a dentist and my kid has bad teeth, or if I'm an electrician and the power goes out of my house, or like there's a power malfunction in my house, like that's my wheelhouse. I should be detecting these threats out, and before we have to change our whole life for that event. I don't know if that makes sense. This probably sounds crazy to certain people, but
it's essentially you saying like this, that whether it be good or bad, this is my experience, and I've seen the bad, the worst of it, but I've also seen what it could contribute to this sort of tribe, to this sort of unit.
Yes.
And based off of that, and based off my experience, I should be able to predict when X, Y, and Z happens. I mean, am I misquoting you, or?
Well, to add on to that, it's these wild events. We think they're wild and crazy, but it's nothing new under the sun. And if you're just a little bit more prepared for that, it just makes it goes from being a catastrophic event to just kind of like a large annoyance, and up to a degree, like Mad Max solar flare stuff. That's wild, but that's also a fantasy.
Yeah.
And so, but civil unrest, etc. And like these are things that are possible, and this is going to sound really white privilegey, but it is kind of easy in America compared to the rest of the world. As far as this is a loaded statement because there's a lot of, I don't know, this is a tangent coming, but certain zip codes have a lot of opportunities locked out from them. I'm aware of that, but at the same time, a lot of America, there's a crap ton of opportunities. Like you started a podcast that no one could stop, right? Like no one could stop you from doing that.
Fair.
And like you can potentially monetize your ideas, this words, and that's pretty wild. It's a pretty wild opportunity. But anyways, so I just kind of prepare for the wild shit because everyone else in my family has the normal day-to-day stuff pretty well in lockdown, and I don't want them to be burdened with the feelings and the anxiety of dealing with that, like staring into the abyss and it stares back at them. Like, no, fam, I'll take that because I've already kind of paid the cost of that. Generally, like I don't know if that sounds crazy, but like I've already kind of like taken that psychological hit.
Yeah,
and I don't want them to have to, but I also want them to get the benefits of that preparedness, I guess, and that way, like they're not super vulnerable, but at the same time, they aren't hypervigilant, I guess. Like the hypervigilance does not ruin their whole life.
Yeah, no, I understand. The one thing I question about that, though, and again, I don't know if it's just my own personal experience or it's just a different point of view, or both maybe, is that while you're saying that and that's your role that you perceive within the unit itself, the unit meaning like the family and everything, we're just obviously. Yeah. It sounds like though if these certain boxes aren't checked according to you, that there's a sense of shame.
Explain a bit more.
So I know it's a little convoluted, but I'll try to. So essentially, it's you saying like this is my burden to carry, and I have to make sure that this is prepared. If I'm an electrician and there's an electrical outlet that's burnt down, that's on me. God damn it, I should have seen that coming. And it sounds to me as though if something were to happen that you perceive that's in your wheelhouse that doesn't go exactly according to your plan, that there would be some shame attached to that.
Maybe a little bit. I see your logic is true, but I would, in a perfect world, I would have to say that I would be a bit of an exception to that, because I'm just kind of used to wild shit happening. Like my entire life is the exception, not the rule. And I mean, I hate to say that flippantly, but like, I'm a genetic anomaly. You know all about that, right? Like, it's like being a redhead's pretty rare. And I mean, I got cancer at 22, pretty rare. Statistics defied, check. And it's just, so yeah, I don't know. I've just become accustomed to that. Like, the entire world will have experience A and I'll have experience D. And, so I don't, yeah, this is going to sound so bad. I've become accustomed to failure. I'm not trying to sound emo and, like an edgelord, but, that is another good thing I got from the Army. They definitely make you inured to failure, I suppose, tempered to it, I suppose.
Okay. But what's the old adage, the old quote, to err is to be human? I think I missed.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. Like, I understand your logic, because obviously, like you said, you definitely have defied every statistic according to your logic.
It's a little dumb. It's kind of stupid.
No, but I mean, like you said, yeah, 22, like cancer. Who the fuck would have thought that, right? And all the other stuff you've experienced. But at the end of the day, like I said, to have that kind of perception sounds, and again, it's just my perception, but it sounds as though it's extremely difficult, right? Because you're saying I'm used to failure, ergo, I'm a perfectionist.
Maybe. My mother-in-law would disagree, but yeah, I'm just trying to do the best I can, I guess. Like,
okay.
And if my best isn't enough, we'll swivel and we'll kind of adapt to that, I suppose. But as long as it doesn't overly burden my family, I would like them to be prepared. And I think that's the job of every parent. Like, your kid is like, it's like a bow and arrow. Like, you can pull that string back and aim it, but once that arrow leaves the bow, like that trajectory, that's you got no more control over that. But this is me drawing the bow back for my son and maybe other children, etc. And because, like, not trying to sound defeatist, because I've got a lot of health problems generally. Like, right now, like, I have no stomach. I forgot to mention that. Like, the surgical solution to the cancer was to max out the chemo and the radiation and then cut out my stomach. And then once you don't have a stomach, apparently your intestines kind of do whatever the hell they want. So I've had hiatal hernias, which basically means my intestines slip up into my lungs, or the pleural space where my lungs are, through the diaphragm, and just kind of hang out there, just kind of get stuck. So that's annoying, super annoying. And so part of me is, this is way TMI for your audience, but part of me, it's almost like a genetic bunt. Like, I had a lot of wild stuff happen to me, but I still have the knowledge and I have the resources to set my son up for success, and hopefully he can basically be the next Batman. I don't know. Like, better than I want him to be better than me in every way, like every conceivable way. I hope that he is. Some people are in an unhealthy way potentially jealous of their children's success, which is so far from what I'm trying to do here. But yeah. Anyways,
so you were talking about your strengths, essentially, right? Like, that you perceive one of your strengths from that certain point of view. What if I were to ask you, Bryan, what is your greatest strength? What, and not just like of a physical sense, but just
I understand
strength.
I remember you asking that to John, and that's such a hard question, because I don't have a massively high opinion of myself. I mean, I assume people are listening to this like, man, this dude's been talking for like an hour and a half about his goddamn self. And he's such an egomaniac, but I feel like I pretty judgmental on my skills. I think my biggest strength, this is going to sound pretty dumb. I don't even understand it myself. I have this ability to, I'll walk in a room, and it'll be filled with people who are much more capable than me, just generally more specialized or better than me at so many things. and they'll look at me and be like, I like this guy. I want to be around this guy. And like, I don't understand it. It just kind of happens. And that's essentially my college experience is they were these young men and women were 5 years younger than me, and they were literally on a meteoric rise. Like to this day, like one is a spec ops commander in the Army.
Wow.
One is a frickin' PhD chemist. The other is a doctor in the middle of COVID crisis, et cetera, et cetera. And for some reason, they still tolerate my existence. They still tolerate my company and all my old curmudgeon opinions. And I think that is kind of, and that's also been the case in the military. Like sure I was a medic, but a lot of the stuff I did was kind of like making people around me, like raising their morale generally is what I think that would be kind of my biggest strength is people will, I am the glue. I am the network, I suppose, the hub, I guess, for all these people to like, yeah. I feel like I've let you down with my hub, like charisma powers. You don't know a lot of these people. And I just realized that. I'm like, holy crap, this dude, he needs my help. The city needs me. But I think that's it. Cause I'm basically a real life example of what happens when you min-max. Like, whoever created me totally dumped Constitution, right? Like I have no hit points at all, 0 hit points. And like, I've always been pretty coordinated. I can talk pretty, I suppose.
Yeah.
And people generally want to be around me. I'm like a bard with no charisma. I mean, excuse me, a bard with no constitution, right? Like everyone's kind of got to like, oh shit, here we go. Like we got to climb something, help out the fucking bard. And like, okay, all right, whatever. But then like at the end of it, no one's really upset with me. And yeah, I guess that's it in a nutshell.
So would you say that
she's
you
super pissed
talk
right
about
now.
being a hub, and when I think of a hub, I think of like a hub is essentially a place where you go to have some sort of care taken. Wow, that was a stupid ass sentence to say. Essentially, some certain needs taken care of, right? So like a caregiver persona is a hub,
Or like an interface, I guess, or a what am I looking? The word I'm looking for. Like a facilitator, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, that's
people,
probably way better.
of people that are really different, and it's kind of wild. And I enjoy that though. Like I enjoy, and I maybe that's what it is. The kind of maybe the key to my strength. Like if we were to talk. Like if I were to meet someone face to face, they'd kind of feel that like this dude actually gives a shit. This is kind of weird. And like he's asking really deep questions, but I'm okay with it. And
yeah. Essentially you not only are a person, like you said, a facilitator where people look to you or from different realms and you bring different realms together as one, but also from the fact that you actually take the time to care. Right.
Oh, yeah.
You take the time to actually, it's not just this facade of a lot of people do where they just juggle in front of people and everyone's laughing at the juggling clown. But it's at the end of the day, you're actually not only making them laugh, but you're actually listening to their story, listening to their narrative.
Oh yeah, we have a true relationship, and then I just kind of pass that baton on to someone else who I generally, this is a bit of a humble brag, but I think a lot of the people I run into are I'm a generalist. A lot of them they're specialists. They specialize in their field, and they'll kind of compare notes, pick each other's brains, and it's a pretty cool thing to watch. And that is actually one thing I really love doing. That's actually, aside from video games and my son, that's basically it. And surviving, the apocalypse. But yeah.
So Bryan, when's the last time you appreciated this strength that you mentioned? When's the last time you took the time to say, you know what? Holy shit, this is something that I'm doing that, you know what, other people may be doing it better, but this is something I'm doing, and I appreciate this about myself.
I don't know. It's a tough question. It's really tough, but I appreciate it every day because sometimes I got some radical views, which I'm really trying to restrain in this format, in this part of this type of podcast. But basically I try to have nuance in my opinions, but I feel I often fall short of that. Like I'm an old curmudgeon. I'm already set in my ways. I'm not even that old, but it just mentally I have certain ideas, and it's very hard to shake them off of me. But the people that I've surrounded myself keep trying to kind of make me better and grind out these hard edges, and they get nothing out of it. So I appreciate that, and if I give them this the link to this podcast and they actually listen to this point, I just want to thank them for all of their patience. And they know who they are, and yeah. So I guess that's how I would appreciate that. Yeah, that's it.
So I'm going to throw a little bit of an audible here as far as some of the questioning. So you mentioned how all these other people were taking the time to kind of help mold you and help bring down those edges, those rough ends, as you will. But the one thing I didn't hear from the answer you just gave was, yes, you're appreciative to the moon about what these people are doing for you, have done for you, will continue to do for you, etc. But I'm not hearing a lot of, I'm appreciating this of what I'm doing for myself. Or am I just completely dead wrong?
No, I see what you're saying. I think, and because yeah, I'm not sure how. If it was like considered to be, say, a superpower, like,
Sure.
Some people can fly, some people can teleport. Bryan makes friends that are better than him, and so I don't know how I would just appreciate that all on my own, because it's kind of a group activity. But I don't think I have an answer for that right now. But
that's totally fair,
because it's a little weird when you're like, yes, people love me and I will use this to my advantage. Like that's a little weird, and that's not kind of who I am. But so yeah, I tried to answer, I could not.
No, that's totally fine, man. Like I said, it's not that I'm looking for answers. If you don't answer them, like, God damn it, Bryan, you're never coming on a podcast again.
Exiled.
It's just, these are thoughts that I have. And again, it's more so like, just because I'm interested in people's narratives, right? I'm interested in their story, not just the story that they tell about others around them, but the stories they tell about themselves and how they perceive themselves. And again, it goes well, like, it's not just because, oh yeah, because I'm in the psych field, so obviously I look for everyone's deep, dark secrets and I expose them to light and blow it up in their faces. No, it's nothing like that. It goes way beyond that. It's just generally, and again, like I mentioned earlier, it's the point of this particular subsection of Ludic Loungecast. It's just a lot of times we don't take the time to think about these things for ourselves, right? Like, some of these questions, if someone were to ask me these, I wouldn't know how the fuck to answer them. Honestly, yes. I wouldn't. So I like to remind the people who are listening, and also the people I'm talking to, interviewing, whatever have you, it's that, these are things that are super important and super things I think the people I have on here, especially like you and John and the future people I have on here, just take the time to start digging a little hole in that. Like, hey, you know what? Yeah, remember that one time I was on that podcast and he asked me this super tough question that I couldn't answer? You should think about that.
Yes, I feel that people throughout the ages have lived long lives and died without having great answers to this.
How clear?
Hold on, my neighbor is clearing my room with my cat. But that was real. It's all right. He was in the Navy and he was on a submarine, and it cost him a bit of his sanity. But it's kind of like hanging out near a Cthulhu statue.
Man, this is staying in the podcast, by the way. I'm not...
Yeah. Anyways, but yeah, I feel like people have throughout time, it's that it is the hardest part. I think it's like the biggest obstacle in life is to figure out these questions, but it's also I feel like it's kind of the point to life. Maybe not 100% of it, but sure, it's a big part of it. Learning, and I think learning. I think that is potentially one of the main commonalities of life itself, I guess. Like learning and existing, and then trying to pass it on. At least that's me. I don't know.
Yeah. No, definitely. So, what is one thing, Bryan, that about you that people would be surprised to know about you?
Man, that's hard. I got a lot of weird, eclectic stuff, but not in like like a American Psycho way. But I I guess that you wouldn't guess it, but I have a lot of kind of strange anti-consumer kind of like ecological leanings, I suppose. Like, but I don't really portray that. Well, on like a first encounter, you think I'm like an anarcho-capitalist type of thing, like, oh, this guy's crazy, wants to dissolve the government, blah blah blah. It's like, no, not quite. But I guess it's actually I'm gonna walk that back. I don't know. That's so tough, man. Because I'm a little lost myself sometimes, some days, because
Sure.
it's almost like I have this terrible habit of I'm like 30% of my personality is the last book that I just read, and and I think that makes me seem a little chaotic sometimes to certain people, and I would like to impress upon them that I am I am more sane than I come off. I guess I don't know.
People would be surprised that I'm actually more sane.
Yes, yes, but no, that is a super tough question because I'm very open. Like that might be potentially why you asked me on this podcast, but I'm pretty open generally because like holding things in, secrets, yada yada, whatever, what have you, it's hard, and I think it it drains you, kind of costs you. But hey, maybe I'm just one of those naive fools, but that's just me. But yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, switching gears a little bit, what career path or paths would you have chose for yourself if education, money, whatever have you, like the points of those were moot? What would you do with your life, essentially?
Man, I don't. That's a hard one. Because I have really fictional goals. I'd basically be a druid. Just literally,
Yes!
just be a real life druid. Like
I love that.
I'd live kind of like I would be the interface of nature and society, nature and civilization. I would kind of guide them both to some sort of harmonious kind of existence. And this is all fantasy, obviously. But and uh, and if you cross me, you're looking at a seriously arduous and costly guerrilla warfare campaign. That's what's in your future. Kind of like Red Dawn,
I was
like
about
the
to say Red Dawn.
like the
Right?
like the eco magic version of Red Dawn. Like you think you're winning, next thing you know, you're just like you're some Central American dude who misses his family because it's cold in Denver. Like it just all comes crashing down on you. You're like,
All right. We have to make this a movie or at least a theme or something because I am now wanting to see Red Dawn with like druids in
pretty
Red.
much. Yep.
I love
Yep.
that shit.
But I guess it's a question I'm still trying to answer because I like so many things, and mostly people I find are focused by things that they won't do. They're like, oh, I hate that so much, and then it kind of narrows down the field. Where I've had the opposite problem. I'm interested in so much crap, and a lot of it not lucrative. That that has been difficult, and I would actually prefer it if my son would be not so much like that. If he could have preferences and focus. I think that is one of my weaknesses. I definitely have lacked focus, but at the same time, like I can talk about Mass Effect or gourmet mushrooms or like unconventional warfare. Like so, I've got like all this random crap in my head, but and and it's at a certain point there is like a confluence of all that crap that creates value, but it's definitely a long game. So I don't know, but that is I would like to be someone who's respected but doing something that is good in the world, I guess. Whatever that looks like, whatever industry that is, I want to I want to be a way for people to have a shortcut to knowledge and not make the same mistakes I did, I guess. That's it. Period. Whatever industry that is, whether that be like homesteading, political theory, or maybe like you, psychology, whatever helps people save some of their limited amount of time on this earth to be, enjoy it instead of making mistakes like this guy did.
Oh, for sure, Brian. And my final question, and again, we've touched upon this almost pretty much throughout the whole interview or conversation, however you want to put it, is why do you think I chose you to be on this podcast? And again, I already kind of cheated and gave you the answer a little bit, but why do you personally think that I chose you to interview?
I don't know, because I can sling bullshit with the best of them. I don't know. Friggin' like excrement expediator is but I don't know. I think there's something weird and anomalous about my life. I don't think I am special. I just think rare and weird shit has happened to me. And something about when people just hear this story, it does something to them. I don't know what it is, because like this isn't even the half of it. Like, I met my wife and we had some strange experiences in this rural county that we lived in California. And then the house burnt down and yada yada. And then we moved to this new area in Texas and yada yada. And like the full story is it's kind of wild. It's interesting, I think. And I think that's why you had me on. It's just shit that happened to me, not what I happened to the world, I guess. That's
no, so it makes sense. And there are portions within what you were just mentioning that are definitely a part of the bigger reasoning as to why I wanted you on here. I wanted you on here, Brian, because personally, not only are you a great friend of mine, but I feel as though you are special. And not just because you had a bunch of weird shit happen to you. Like that's the B side to it, in my opinion. I think that you have a great and interesting mind. I think you bring a lot of interesting ideas onto the table. Some I agree with, some I don't. And I tell you flat to your face, or I challenge you, like we've had in the past. But on top of all of that, I think that you are a person who not only deserves to have a platform in which to talk about these things, but I feel as though you're a person who, again, no matter where you fall on a political spectrum, economic spectrum, what have you, but you've always stuck to your guns and your values. While some may be molded and shaped, but you've always stuck to those, and I've always respected you for that. And yes, you could sling bullshit with the best of them. But I think you bring so much more to the table than just that. And I know a lot of times it's hard to look inward and notice that, like, which is why you had a hard time defining the strength and appreciating, that other question, sub-question of that. But I think that you sell yourself short a lot of times. So not only did I want to give you a platform, but I also wanted to remind you of how important a person you are to this world and for what you bring into this world.
Yeah, back at you. Everything you said, I ditto. And I appreciate the opportunity. And I wish you all the success with this venture. You're vicariously living my dream. This is it, baby. Yep. Freely broadcasting to the people.
Yeah, pretty much until I turn into an 80s villain and just sell out and become a multimillionaire. And then Brian the Druid comes.
That's right. Gotta restore balance. Gotta bring you to that true neutral zone. Welcome to the neutral zone, baby.
Oh my God, that is a great way to end it, by the way. Welcome to the neutral zone, baby. So friends, I've been Antonicus, Anthony to my friends, and Anthony to as Brian knows me. Brian, I thank you for your time. I thank you for even wanting to be on this thing, spending the time to be grilled by me and just have some insights that maybe you haven't thought about in a while or haven't thought about at all. But I appreciate you being not only in my life, being in my wife's life, and everything that you and yours brings to my personal, humble experience.
Yep, definitely, sir. It's been great. Thank you.
Alrighty, so thank you all for listening. If you've made it to this point, Thank you. Thank you for listening. And we'll catch you next time on Ludic Lives.